Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out.
The country known to most Twitter users by the red and yellow emoji formally joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, on Friday, March 27. A veritable gusher of mutual and self-admiring congratulations promptly issued forth on Twitter, with politicians, diplomats, unelected but very bossy NGO and civil society leaders, and other various lost souls all competing with each other to offer their very best. Except for the vast majority of the world, even the vast majority in the Twitter sphere, not a soul noticed. Nevertheless, Macedonia is now a member of NATO and, by the looks of it, will begin accession talks with the European Union in... checks notes. Well, we don't have a date or even a hint of a date, but Macedonia will begin those accession talks at some point, assuming the EU continues to exist. Which seems to be in doubt these days. Even as the coronavirus makes Europe its vast home, it seems that EU leaders can't do much about it and continue with their squabbling. Even NATO, with its vast resources, is eerily quiet these days. But not to worry, says citizen leader Zoran Zaev, the once and he hopes to be future Prime Minister of Macedonia. Zaev announced last week that the Macedonian government budget faces a staggering €2 billion shortfall. His solution? Cut the public administration's salary down to minimum wage. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from, actually, it's not really splendid isolation here, at the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin and Jason calling in from a hyperbaric chamber in Skopje, Macedonia.
You're under curfew, aren't you, buddy?
Yeah, it keeps the viruses out. Curfew, this is now 9 in the evening, and it's been like a curfew for like 5 hours.
Bloody hell.
And the day is still, the night is still young. So it's pretty
except you can't do it. Except you can't do anything.
Nope.
You're under curfew. That's right. So what are your... we are recording this on Sunday, the last Sunday of March 2020, maybe the last March ever. This is episode 65 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. Yes, you guys just switched time. You went into daylight savings time, right?
Yeah, we wake up earlier, 1 hour earlier now, to make full use of the glorious sunshine, and obviously there are guards with guns outside, not letting us get.
And here in the great sovereign state of Arizona, we do not do daylight savings time at all, for the glorious reason: why the hell in June, July, and August would you want an extra hour of daylight?
Why work more?
Well, yeah, especially outside or anything like that when it's nice and warm. It's going to be, and just to, I keep seeing all that we're reading, consuming way too much news than we should these days. At least people like you and me that are news junkies and in the business of dealing with the media or writing.
In the biz.
So there's various studies and whatnot that say yes, okay. So various viruses obviously historically slow down in the summer. We're coming up on warmer weather here in where I sit in Oro Valley. It's going to be in the mid 80s this week, so 84, 85, 86. So that's around 30 Celsius. It's going to be glorious and beautiful and blue skies and all that. I'm sorry if you don't have that there. I don't want to rub it in. But we'll see. Right here in Pima County, Arizona. Arizona has 15 counties. Pima County is the size geographically of Macedonia, but with half the population, about 1 million. We have 150 cases and 5 deaths. And I know you just had a couple more deaths there, correct?
Yeah, we are up to 250 plus cases and 6 deaths. Most of the deaths are elderly. There was a young kid who died today, 31. There was no report on his healthcare situation. Other than that, he was obese. This probably contributed to his death. But also the healthcare minister said it was an extremely rapid and serious type of symptoms, which literally ripped through him, like with internal bleeding. He said it was horrible. There are like these various levels of symptoms you can get. I think there were like 5 stages of how badly it can affect you. Most people will be unaffected, but this was one of the. He said it was one of the worst symptoms that you could get from this virus.
Wow. Well, unlike many of our friends, some of our friends on the far left, we do offer our thoughts and prayers to the family of this young man and others there that have passed away. I know we had talked a little bit offline that we want to kind of look at the news and then talk about some other aspects of this global epidemic, and not just the current, but the future and what it's going to bring. But first, why don't we talk a little bit about what we talked about in the monologue there. Congratulations, Cvetin.
Hey,
you're a member.
NATO
you're a NATO member, the world's most successful military alliance ever. What is NATO doing for you today?
Really nothing.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
There was a big deal in Serbia. They would get like Chinese equipment and assistance, and then somebody made a big fuss how this is unseemly of a EU candidate country. And there was one plane which landed there with equipment, and they had the EU flag. And Carl Bildt complained, saying, "Well, why don't you make a bigger deal out of this? It was only the Prime Minister welcoming this shipment, and not the President, who is more important." And then eventually the Prime Minister told, no, this is again a Chinese plane with Chinese equipment. The EU just paid for the Chinese plane to fly here, and that's why we put the flag. Otherwise, everything else is donated from China. So we got nothing. And even less here. We don't even get Chinese stuff here, let alone European stuff.
Right, which, not to put too fine a point on it, of course, it was NATO that accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in 1999 during NATO's very, I'm using air quotes, defensive war against what was then Yugoslavia, which is just dripping with irony. But anyway, so you're a member of NATO. I was a little bit unfair to NATO. I said, what have you got out of NATO? Obviously, the point of NATO is you all contribute to NATO for your collective defense against enemies that you can see. Obviously, the virus is not something that you can see. But NATO, it seems, there was this gusher of self-congratulation, mutual admiration society on Twitter of people rushing over each other to congratulate each other on this. And it's going to happen again tomorrow. Tomorrow's Monday, the 30th of March, when the flag is going to be raised.
Oh no, they're doing that? Oh, God.
So another round of self-congratulation will happen, and then we can forget about it all.
Nobody noticed here. I mean, seriously, it's, people lining up in front of supermarkets we have to wait 2 steps behind the person in front of us, and nobody not knowing where will the next paycheck come from. And I was actually recalculating our NATO contribution. We're supposed to pay 2% of the GDP into defense, which would then, be used for NATO, obviously, some of it. And the way things are going, it will amount to $57 and a few tomatoes. The way our economy is contracting and collapsing. Nobody noticed this. The SDSM tried their best. They had like a platoon of cannons shooting blanks over Skopje, to celebrate the NATO membership, but nobody cared about this.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to another friend of mine on Friday after that 6 p.m. cannon explosion, and he didn't even know that Macedonia had officially joined NATO. He said he'd heard this, and I had to tell him that that's what that was all about. I talked to on Friday. I talked to another friend in Estonia who's in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs up there. He was out in the countryside with his family. He didn't know that Macedonia had joined NATO, so. So anyway, you're a member of NATO. Yes, thank you very much. Next. But as you mentioned, Zaev, the budget there, 2 billion euro, not 2 billion dinars. 2 billion euro. How the hell did that happen?
Well, it's a projection. It's every budget is wishful thinking, and their wishful thinking for an election year was 4 billion almost, and much of the spending was primed for the start of the year because elections were supposed to take place in April, and Zaev wanted to bribe all the welfare recipients, all the farmers, with subsidies, and everything had to be paid out by April, so everybody is at peak optimism, primed to vote for SDSM, and much of the budget is filled with this 18% sales tax, and sales are not very good of anything lately. We had a shopping spree of pasta and toilet paper, and since then everything has stopped. Non-essential stores are closed, like cafes, restaurants, hotels. People are just purchasing the barest essentials, and if at that, and you can't even get out. And it's very uncomfortable to go to a store now. It's really crowded, and they don't let you. You have to wait for a person to get out before the next person can come in. You walk through. Yeah. You try to fit a mask over your face. The saleswomen are grumpy. Obviously, I mean, imagine what they're going through. You have to walk through a sponge doused with some bacteria-killing liquid. It's pretty unpleasant, and people are not. I mean, I was very cavalier at the start of the crisis, going to a different store every other day and piling essentials. And now, I don't feel. I don't even use my prison yard time. Some of the days I stayed at home. So the budget, it's a complete mess. And Zaev. Vumerov first came out with a bunch of proposals, like cover up to 50% of the salaries of people in tourism in the worst hit industries from the budget. They found like 400 million lying around the budget. The central bank, actually, which they say is not important, it's not used to prop up the currency, so you can put it into active measures to help companies. And then, let's loan 600, let's tap into the privately managed retirement inflows. There is a separate retirement system, like privately managed. So let's use this to prop up the state retirement system. So they had some good creative ideas, and then Zaev came out and made his proposal to, public sector employees earn upwards of 400, 500 euros here, and there is about 100,000 of them. While retirees earn upwards of 200, 250 euros, and there is like 400,000 of them, so 4 times more. They earn about half what a public sector employee would earn, the retirees, but there is 4 times more of them.
Right.
So Zaev was facing elections. At some point, he's going to have to make, we're going to have elections unless they extend this martial law indefinitely. Zaev mentioned June, October, December is the latest. Yeah. And Zaev is facing obliteration at the polls because, that's the least of our worries right now, but apparently not for him. If he has to skip paying the retirees or the public sector, and it's Sophie's choice, one of them has to go. So he said, I'm going to try and make this unnoticeable. I'm not going to ask for a sacrifice from the retirees. I'm going to cut the salaries for the public sector employees drastically from 400, 500 euros down to 230, which is the minimum wage for 2 months. And there was total outrage. People were screaming at him, the unions. The opposition said, listen, we had much more sensible proposals. Let's meet, discuss this. Zaev would not meet them. And today again, he said, we're doing this. I'm proposing this. I insist on this. There's obviously opposition in his own party to this idea. And he keeps moving the goalposts. He and his lieutenants. Today it's a projected whole of 1.3 billion out of a budget of 4 billion, of nearly 4 billion. The next day is 2 billion out of 4 billion. So it's huge. I mean, it's a sinking ship. The budget is torn to shreds at this point.
Wow. Well, and I know you mentioned that Vumerov has some other ideas that the government rejected, didn't even want to talk about those other ideas. I haven't explored those. But let's touch briefly on the EU accession, because that will solve all your problems, of course, and you'll become a rich country overnight. This past week, Macedonia and Albania were given a green light, quote unquote, by whichever European Commission group, etc. They're all so confusing, the whole alphabet soup. Anyway, the bottom line is that finally, after 485 years of positive reports, Macedonia got a green light to start accession talks, except for the fact that there's no date.
Yeah.
And the various news articles and pundits and analysts that I have seen said maybe in the fall it'll start, maybe in 2021 it'll start. But that's just the starting point, let alone all the chapters. And I know they've reorganized everything, but still, we're talking Dimitar Bechev, the Bulgarian analyst that teaches it in somewhere in North Carolina. He said late. Yeah, I know he's a leftist thinker, but his doesn't mean he can't be right on things. And his analysis was maybe late 2020s, maybe early 2030s, that Macedonia would join the EU if the EU exists. So for all of you for all of you looking at the EU and saying this is a miracle drug, not so fast. So.
Yeah, we were supposed to get a date. That was the next big reveal, because we've been approved to open accession talks since 2005 when we became a candidate. Right. But we were the first country never to. They kept salami slicing. Normally you become a candidate and you open accession talks immediately. Right. That was the usual thing. For us, it was, okay, you're a candidate, but no accession talks. Okay, now we have a recommendation for accession talks, but not a date. And and now we have a political decision to open accession talks, but again, no date, maybe in June. So it's so exhausting and annoying. Nobody pays attention to this either. I was paying much more attention to what happened in Kosovo, because noticed all those people on Twitter who were supporting the toppling of VMRO in Macedonia by the US State Department direct intervention in the European Union funded and Soros-funded colored revolution. Now, something very similar happened to Kosovo, to the Albin Kurti, a populist leftist government, which a bunch of people who wanted Gruevski gone in Macedonia, they were very fond of Kurti. So it's very, amusing to see all those people who were supporting a State Department-funded colored revolution, saying, "Oh my God, Trump's State Department toppled the Balkan government." Like, yeah, sure, of course. But what comes next is, they're denying this, of course, but it's very likely that this will lead to restoration of Hashim Thaçi. I mean, Hashim Thaçi is still president, and now without a prime minister, all power will flow back to him. And he has already made proposal, a plan with Vučić of Serbia and Mogherini. This was done with Mogherini's help from the European Union. She's out now, but apparently people in the US are in favor to give some territory, which is Serbian populated, from Kosovo back to Serbia, and then Serbia would recognize what's left of Kosovo. And, for us, the most important thing is here, as I noted on Twitter a couple of times, that the Zaev guys are petrified of this, because they know that once Kosovo feels it lost territory to Serbia as part of this settlement, they're going to look for compensation. And Albanian majority parts of Macedonia, possibly even including the capital Skopje, are right there. And there was this magnificent tweet from Tim Judah, who is again one of these people who worked for the coup in Macedonia and now opposes the Trumpian coup in Kosovo. He posted a picture of Stevo Pendarovski during their powwow a few weeks ago here in Skopje, saying, "This guy is really scared of the partition of Kosovo, like he's really scared, just look at him." And the face was bug-eyed Stevo. And there's this famous, Russian prank call in which Zaev was also super scared of this development. He thinks he's talking to Jens Stoltenberg, and he keeps going to this position, to this item on the agenda. But they want to partition Kosovo. I mean, this would be very bad for us. You see, we can't survive this. So we could have big trouble in the newest NATO member state if things get messy next door. This was the big development in the region actually this week, not Macedonia joining.
That's true. Yes.
NATO.
Good point. The law of unintended consequences takes over. Anyway, but let's talk, because I know we wanted to devote some time to kind of a amateur armchair future predictions about this virus, which has overtaken the world and is driving people mad, I think, more than killing them. But it's going to fundamentally change the way we as humans think and operate, and in many practical areas of our lives. And we wanted to talk a little bit about what we think those are going to be. Let's start with the big one. It seems like most kids are out of school right now, and they should be in school, and they're at home, and that puts stress on parents. It puts stress on teachers. It puts stress on the kids. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're learning about homeschooling. So now I should mention I have two sisters, both younger, but the older one, she and her husband made a decision way back when to homeschool their three kids for most of their time. Eventually, they went into high school, but for certainly grade school through junior high, they were all homeschooled. So my brother-in-law was fortunate to have a good job that allowed my sister to stay home and do that. But anyway, homeschooling is a big deal here in the United States. I don't know about other countries. I certainly don't know about if it's going on in Macedonia, but you're quickly learning about homeschooling and online education and things like that. Tell our listeners and me, frankly, what's going on with that, and where you see that going with Macedonia post-crisis.
Yeah, here it's totally verboten, homeschooling. You actually get fines. I think even if you don't pay the fines, you go to prison. If you do not enroll your children into elementary and high school. The high school part is slightly less regular, it's more lax.
Yeah.
But
especially in the villages.
There's a constitutional ban on privately owned elementary schools in Macedonia, again avoided for the kids of the diplomats and the elite here, but you cannot set up a private school under the constitution, and you have to enroll your children into a public school.
That's for grade school, because there are private high schools, right?
There are. For private high schools, there is no constitutional ban on setting them up, and if it's certified, you can enroll your kids in a private high school. But because the public sector is so sprawling and vast, the private sector is much less developed. But now, as of the past several weeks, we're in a very interesting situation where Gruevski was making major attempts to modernize the education, to disperse universities, so smaller towns could have like department of this or department of that, so university students wouldn't have to all move to Skopje, and to introduce computers into the schools, elementary and high schools, but the teachers unfortunately didn't know what to do with them, and little was done. And what was done was being bitterly opposed. But now everybody has to learn on the fly, and we are getting along. Things are getting done, on the initiative of the parents. Some teachers, get on with the program. Others are incapable of doing so, but they will quickly be left behind. So people are using Google Classroom, and teachers are handing out assignments there, and you can. And initially, they want children to write in the notebook and then take a picture of the notebook and then post the picture. But quickly we're, realizing, wait, we can do everything on the computers now. We don't have to use pen and paper anymore. So there is a UK government-funded YouTube channel where teachers from across the country who are now idling at home, obviously, they set up a phone, they record themselves for 10, 15 minutes, giving a lecture on some lesson, history, geography, whatever, and then some very simple animation is done, like, if it's the Romans, you post a few pictures, somebody's doing this, they got a few kids apparently doing this, and this is uploaded on YouTube and sent to the children. So pretty soon we'll realize that we can have, a full home, because this scare of the virus is going to continue. I mean,
sure.
Even when the all clear signal is given,
right?
Parents will not lightly send their children back to school. So now we are sitting at home. Soon we'll have like 2 or 3 different teachers giving the same lecture. Mm-hmm. So we'll be able to pick and choose who is better. Some will become popular, I guess. We'll start counting their YouTube clicks. We'll have an excellent development. This is a public sector, public funded education, but there is a huge class system. So the Skopje high schools, the high school I went to, Korchagin, it's considered like the elite, and we're looking down.
I always knew you were an elitist.
The students. Oh yeah, of course. Downtown kid, and but usually this is the red bourgeoisie. I was like an outlier in these circles, and now a kid from like a small town, from a village, attending a high school we Skopjaners look down upon, could have the same lecture in video format. So that's excellent. This is out of necessity. We're quickly changing the way our education system works. And I was just joking about this with some guys that there will be a problem how to evaluate the students in the end. But Gruevski left this huge program for external evaluation. So he wanted to, because he knew there was rampant corruption in how the grades are given. At the end of the year, if your child is a dumbass, but you're an important person, you go to the teachers and you bribe them, pressure them, do you know who I am, stuff like that. And they give your kid an A. And Gruevski insisted there is an external test, which, yes or no questions, or like circle several options. And the unions cried bloody murder, and it contributed to the protests. The U.S. embassy here used this to drum up protests, get high school kids protesting. This was even before Greta's time. And but now we have a problem that kids are going to study at home fine, but how we evaluate them, and then we're going to have to go back to the dreaded and loaded Gruevski devised external testing regimen, which is a great piece of irony here in the whole situation.
Oh, that is great. Yeah. Well, maybe that, and maybe out of this, the idea of homeschooling will take hold. Again, I mentioned my nieces and nephew, and a lot of people think that homeschooling, well, the kids don't get any socialization, and that's not true at all. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of opportunities, and it's an industry here. So and it works, and all 3 of them are extremely smart. I say as their proud uncle, and it's true. My youngest niece, these past couple of weeks, she goes to a private Christian school, but obviously she's at home. They're using Zoom, which billions of people around the world have become familiar with Zoom the past 2 weeks. And so they're doing.
I still haven't, but it's very popular.
No, it's great actually. I was watching. Actually, I mentioned to you the Glop podcast. Jonah Goldberg, Rob Long, and John Podoritz do the Glop Culture podcast. They did a live one last night on Zoom, and it's hilarious. But anyway, so Zoom, all kinds of things are going to come out of this in terms of how education is changed. Actually, I was talking to a buddy of mine on Friday up in the Phoenix area. His wife is a high school teacher. Obviously, she's at home, but he works in the publishing industry, working with college textbooks. And he said it's going to fundamentally change what they do as well. It already is. So all of these things, this is down the line. We're actually making up a lot of people I think are making up the rules as they go along right now. That's understandable. And it is a big stress on parents and children and teachers, etc. But it will be very interesting to see what develops as a result of this.
Note that this here is not yet proper homeschooling. This is still under the umbrella of the government public sector.
Right.
But it once we make the precedent that we can study at home, we can have our kids studying at home, then it's a very easy step at reorganizing. Okay, I don't like this school where I'm geographically located, but I'm not attending it anyway, or don't have to attend it. I want to associate myself with another school, with another set of teachers, and these could over time, have different curriculums. Like one would be more computer-oriented, another would be more like liberal arts, and some, God forbid, might be more religious-oriented. So we are, once the principle has been set, and we're obviously going to have such a surplus of teachers, because you only need like 3 history teachers giving the lecture, doing YouTube lectures, and we're done. Why would we need the other 500 throughout Macedonia? So it's going to be a lot of churn, a lot of creative destruction here being done by this misfortune / opportunities for reform of sclerotic government administration.
Yes. Another area that we had talked about offline that I know we wanted to touch on post-apocalypse, post-pandemic, was how the cities might, people's living habits, let's put it that way, will change in terms of high-density areas. People might be looking to get out. And a lot of people obviously are working from home, and they can work from home. Whereas the technology was the same 4 weeks ago as it is today, a lot of people have been forced to use that technology while working from home, and it works. So if that's the case, why do you want to live in a high-density urban area when you can work from Macedonia's Tuscany, Kavadarci, out in the amongst the lush grape vineyards, and work from there to borrow from Macedonia, or here? Of course, I live in a very low density area. If any of those New Yorkers who are now quarantined, decide after this that they want to come out here and live in a place with gorgeous weather and beautiful view of the mountains, my home is always for sale at an extreme premium price right now. But what do you think is going to happen with the way people work and live beyond this in terms of the cities?
Yeah, a bunch of people are realizing that this place is a death trap. I mean,
when you say this place, do you mean Skopje?
Skopje,
okay,
yeah, of course.
Right.
Every high density, and after President Trump announced he might quarantine New York, and I kind of felt he's gonna end like Batman villain at the end of his term. And people are realizing this. I mean, a lot of you could see the governor of New York reminding everybody, well, listen, we can form a militia, we can give people guns here. To fight a tyrannical government. Like, you could almost imagine somebody was talking about this all the time for decades and decades in the US, and you were mocking the right. So a lot of taboos are going out the window. Gun ownership is going to change. Perception of gun ownership. Perception of the rubes in the flyover country who are producing the food and the raw materials and everything, who are now the only people who are obviously essential, while everybody else is like, well, your yoga business is not very necessary right now, and your artisanal coffee shop is not the most important place that needs to be kept open at this moment.
Are you saying that lesbian dance theory is not important?
I think they closed the lesbian dance factory in Skopje. And we're realizing the people who matter in all of this, and they're the people who we used to look down upon a lot, like truckers and food producers, farmers, and but the whole principle of, I remember joking once with one of our IT entrepreneurs who has like a bunch of people employed in an old industrial plant in Skopje, and I was joking like, well, listen, good thing you're located next to the railway track, so once your product is assembled and ready for delivery, you can easily load it up on the railway on a train and forward it to Germany or wherever you're exporting it. Like, it's very convenient. And I wrote this was, the joke was like maybe a decade ago, and still we would see new software companies open up in Skopje, and they would still shop for offices in downtown, in the center of the Skopje. They want to overlook Skopje 2014. They want to overlook the river. But why? What's the point? You can have the infrastructure everywhere, and Skopje is like has for 3 months it has the worst air quality in the world. Traffic is nothing by American standards, but still annoying by our standards. And why wouldn't you, as you said, why wouldn't you want to live outside, especially if we get this other thing done, have our kids receive the same education as the coveted, high school, elementary schools in Skopje, and rubbing shoulders with all the right people in Skopje. You could still do that online in a community, outside of the city, and which will not turn into a zombie apocalypse once something like this goes wrong. And again, this is going to keep repeating. This is not going to, once we made it a principle that we have to shut down everything because there is a nasty flu, a nasty bug going around, it's going to keep repeating. This is never going to stop. Every time we have another outbreak of some nasty flu, this is life is going to come to a standstill. If gas prices remain low, we build some solid infrastructure to different parts of the country. The IT infrastructure is in place. If we break up the centralized education system, like Gruevski was trying, and against all odds and against fierce resistance, why wouldn't we reimagine city living? This city was built for the steel mill, which had like 10,000 people working there, or the chemical Ohis plant, which is now rusting away with chemicals like in a Simpsons episode leaking into the ground with 6,000 people. And now we can just have light car parts manufacturing, which can be done anywhere in a quickly assembled line. And even this is dangerous. I suppose we're going to have to scale down. It's no longer safe having 6,000 people going to a plant in Kavadarci making car thingamajigs. It's probably going to have to be scaled down to 100, 200, 300 people in several locations if it's technologically possible. But we could really, put available technology to use and start living a suburban life or ex-urban life.
Right. Yeah. No, that's going to happen there. It's going to happen here. It's going to happen everywhere. It's harder for me to imagine because I live in a much less densely populated area, especially here where I am in Oro Valley. But even Tucson, which is just south of here, is about 500,000 actual city limits, but it's spread out. It's a big valley. Phoenix, which is a 2-hour drive north of here, is a much bigger area, as you know. But even then, it literally takes, and Phoenix is surrounded by, there's Scottsdale, Gilbert, Chandler, Tempe, Mesa. I mean, literally, that metropolitan area, it takes an hour to drive east to west or north to south, just through the metropolitan area. So it's huge. But yeah, so that's another thing that'll happen. This is something, we didn't talk about this offline, but I did want to mention it because it's relevant to you. It's relevant to us as well. It's everywhere. Elections. And, so here in the United States, for especially our Macedonian listeners that don't understand how the system works, we have it's the counties. Well, the state election commission for each of the 50 states regulates how the election is conducted. And then the counties, it further devolves down to the counties, etc. So you've got a lot of states that have early voting and voting by mail and things of this nature. And, of course, there's all this talk now about we got elections coming up 7 months from next week, and then 7 months, the national election for president, 435 members of the House, a third of the Senate, governors, all kinds of, and people are saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this, especially if this thing continues? And I don't know, but the whole idea of voting by mail, which I think the state of Oregon mandates that, voting by mail. I guess that's a possibility. I think I'll have to check in with my Estonian friends because they do a lot of Estonia. They do a lot of electronic stuff. I think they vote electronically. There's that. But then here's a curious thing I've been thinking about: early voting. So a lot of states here allow you to vote, by mail, send in your ballot like a month before the elections. Now, here's the thought: what if we get down to the elections here and it's Trump and Biden, and it's say October, first week of October, and Biden drops dead of something. He's got a history of health problems, etc. He's on the ballot. Millions of people have already voted for him. Then what? Nobody knows. It's never happened before.
Be real tricky.
It's never happened before. It will happen at some point if the Republic lasts long enough, especially when you get really old candidates with underlying health conditions. This has nothing to do with coronavirus. But anyway, my point being that the whole system of voting is going to change. You mentioned earlier that Zaev now said that June at the earliest, maybe October, maybe December.
Yeah.
And then I asked what year. But I don't think, has there ever been any talk in Macedonia about voting by ballot or electronic voting or anything like that?
We tried to promote this for the diaspora, which obviously, SDSM wanted to curb their right to vote. Sure. And even in the most convenient situation, even if you have like the consulate in Detroit or in Melbourne, it still takes you have to waste half a day to go there to vote. You have to come back. It's a very difficult proposition, and SDSM wanted it done that way. Vemera would sometimes think about maybe at least letting the diaspora vote by mail or email or whatever.
Right.
I would be very skeptical about doing this in Macedonia. Maybe early voting, but still at the designated voting station with a lot of disinfectant. Maybe postpone it, drag it out over several days.
Now there's an idea. Right.
Yeah. Otherwise, after what we've been through, the coup in 2015, 2016, the very suspicious, Albanian voting patterns supporting SDSM, then, late evening turnout and stuffing ballots, the obvious international pressures on who do we elect with the referendum and everything. There is a lot of violations of the sanctity of vote of democracy in general. I mean, just given how many people in the opposition have been arrested, now that everybody is under a curfew, it's no longer such a big deal. But we had so many people from the opposition charged, prosecuted systematically, and many of them detained that it was really approaching the levels of a Central Asian country whose name ends with Stan, than a European member state. But I wouldn't. I'm all for creative destruction in other areas, but not so much here. The reason I keep going to this issue of suburbanizing the cities and abandoning this principle of high density living is also very political, because we've seen high density destroys the family. It's very difficult to have a family cooped up in an apartment of 40, 50 square meters. What's it like? 600, 700 square feet. And we've seen how the centers of the cities vote in the US and in Macedonia and everywhere. And we've seen how the suburbs work. It's much a vote.
Right.
The culture is different. You can still have a family. You can have some, the dad barbecuing, the mom cooking. You have the kids playing in a pool or at the tennis court. Suburbs are still, they might be working a high-end job, which is associated with, just like the creative jobs are often associated, or highly educated jobs are associated with left-leaning tendencies, but you could still live a normal life which wouldn't be out of place in the 50s in the US. In Europe, everybody insists that you need to have a walking distance to your store, like this medieval style cities, that we should preserve them, and with narrow streets and everything is in close proximity. But it killed the family structure, and just relying on cars, on better infrastructure, dispersing them, you get far more traditional thinking. You preserve much more of the traditional lifestyle. And this is what I would also like to see, in your case, preserved, and in our case, maybe reinvented.
Right.
We've never had it in the modern age, but we might be on the verge of... I mean, seriously, you pay 50, 60, 70,000 euros for the privilege of living in Skopje and then earning, like, what, 1,000 euros a month and spending it all on, I'm talking a household,
right.
and spending it all on the exorbitant prices we have here. And now with Zaev's announced salary cuts, it's really... I mean, we'll still have a huge period of adjusting, seeing what this does to the real estate prices, to stability of the currency. What we're discussing now comes after the economic meltdown, which is obviously coming.
Yes, there is that, the global depression, perhaps, and let's hope not. But yeah, every government is scrambling to do some sort of economic stimulus, which, as a fiscal conservative, obviously we don't like the idea of just creating money out of thin air ex nihilo. But this is not a situation where this is a different situation. So, but anyway, what else is going to change?
What else is going to change? Aviation, hospitality.
True. Actually, yes. All of the people that are out of work right now. And interesting, I was talking to my Estonian friend the other day and asking him about the restaurants in Tallinn and Tartu. Most of them are shuttered, and they're not offering takeaway or delivery. Whereas here in the greater Tucson area, I can go to any local website here, the media, and they will list 450 restaurants that are open, offering takeout, takeaway, delivery, etc. And the community here has really rallied around that. And so, I don't know, in Skopje, how is that turning out? Not just Skopje, but Macedonia. How is that turning out with the restaurants being closed and people being able to take away or delivery?
I haven't seen any of these rallying around your local restaurant or coffee shop movements. I've seen a lot of people cooking, even with flour, which was a lost trade here, obviously, a lost art, like doing their
baking
bread out of scratch. Yeah, I certainly have. I mean, okay, I do that anyway, but even more so now. But I'm personally slightly apprehensive of takeout. There are several places I would like to start patroning again if they survive, but I haven't seen an aggressive offering of takeout. Like, you love their place, come back, we'll have it delivered. The delivery is, I guess, again, a source of contagion. So I think people are feeling more comfortable waiting in line at the supermarket, buying their meat. The butcher told me, people were buying meat like crazy. First, we were joking. First we bought the spaghetti, then we realized, okay, listen, now I need something to make the bolognese sauce or the carbonara. And meat was flying off the shelves after the initial toilet paper and pasta scram. And I think people are feeling more comfortable, like, sear your stuff at home. It's safe than having somebody deliver it to you. But I think it's doable, and maybe they can come up with some type of packaging that would reassure people again that.
Again, and I don't know if it's cultural or not, but again, here, people are crazy to go out, not crazy in a bad way, but crazy after the restaurants here and trying to support them because they know, and maybe that's because here, especially, you've got, I don't know, I'd be curious to do on a per capita basis restaurants per population, just for example, for here versus Skopje. But we just got such a huge community of restaurants, and Americans, as you know, love to eat out. So people are really rallying behind that. I don't go out much. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love seeing a few Arizona restaurants. I love the style and everything. Here, I think it's culturally, in the US, I think people more associate a restaurant, a place with the family owning it.
Right.
Here, people would often talk about the big boss owning this or that restaurant. People like a bit more jealous.
Yeah.
I mean, Macedonians are more jealous of success, and oftentimes they would see like a cafe owner driving a fancy car, and the owner would like to even make that image, make that impression that, he has, like they would park these fancy cars in front of, in violation of parking rules
Right.
at one place on the Partizanska Street in Skopje. So, obviously the owner of the cafe wants to leave an impression that he's the big guy, big boss there. And it's more difficult to feel sorry for him now that they're suffering. It's, I think it's more, we're catching more like that vibe.
Interesting. Yeah, but, the owner's one thing, it's the employees that are having to be laid off.
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking my favorite restaurant in Skopje in all of Macedonia is Nagic, there in Debarmalo. And Stole, the owner, was a friend of mine, and I'm thinking of the waiters that I know and others, and it's just kind of, wow, are they going to be around when I get back to Skopje? I'm not even sure when that's going to be, but hopefully soon. Maybe sometime this summer, we'll see. Which could lead us into, we could talk about how the airline industry is going to change and things like that, but that's not something you can just, people need to travel. For business, even though, a lot of meetings are occurring online and whatnot, but still, you're going to have that. You need it as humans, as a species. We need this face-to-face personal contact with each other beyond our immediate families. And there is such a richness that is developed that we get by being able to go to other countries and places and things like that, whether it's on vacation or and certainly when I come to Macedonia, I don't necessarily consider that a vacation. I just consider it coming home. But that's going to have to continue, and it will continue. I just don't know how it's going to change.
Yeah, big growing industry here were the shopping malls. They have a huge one being built close to where I live, which was supposed to surpass the Skopje City Mall by a lot. It was supposed to be like the mega project at this old fairgrounds.
Oh, right.
The Skopski Sam, the old Skopje. And talk about bad timing. I mean, they might try to convert this in residential before it's completed. But
that's interesting too, because malls in America, as you know, were a big thing in the 70s, is when they kind of took off in the 80s and the 90s, and now even before Corona, they started closing down or being converted to mixed use. So because people, and a large, Amazon obviously has got a huge role as a part of the reason for that, etc. But yeah, that's interesting that you they
would start thinking small.
Yeah.
Maybe stuff like strip malls will make a comeback, but things you can do from your car, that's not popular. There are like even I think a place even began offering like a drive-through corona test. They're popular all over the world, and this is now the big thing. Maybe people with cars are now smug, rightfully so, over the people who are professing public transportation, because the public transit is a death trap right now, and we're doing away with a lot of leftist style of thinking, which I completely hated. But as you said, we might then mess it up on the big issues, such as a never-ending state of emergency, which the left loves, and universal basic income, which the left is now demanding.
And it's not sustainable.
Yeah, talk about creating perverse incentives. It's gonna, people are just gonna stop going to work, and except in these essential departments. If these things, if you introduce universal basic income and for the pretend jobs, which we apparently had so many of.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think next week, this has been a good podcast. I think next week we'll have plenty more things to talk about, not only just the news, but I did like what we were able to discuss the future, because there will be a future. This too shall pass. And it'll be interesting to see how humanity adapts to it, both on a local level and on a global scale. So until then, I hope you stay safe in your splendid curfewed isolation.
Thank you hope you guys hold it together. You're in good hands with the president.
No, well, not only that, but we're here in the free state of Arizona. We're free to do almost whatever we want, not entirely. So
at least you're not snake plisskened it in New York.
Yes, there's so many references to that this week. Well, always good talking to you, Cvetin, and we will talk to you next week.
You too, buddy. Take care.
All right.